Well, welcome back to Managerial Accounting. There are two things I wanted to briefly follow up on in Chapter 5, and they are what we do for costs associated with byproducts and how we actually use what we've learned about allocating support costs and allocating joint costs, how those come into performance evaluation. So byproducts and cost allocation and performance evaluation. So I'm going to pick up my slides on those of you who like to follow along in the slides. I believe it is slide 46, which is the one on byproducts. So byproducts are something that comes out of the production process, but is a very small value. So since it's a very small value in terms of revenues that we get, we don't want to spend a lot of time having to allocate costs of the joint production cost to something that has very small market value. So what we do is basically we've got two choices. We can either use the revenues we get from this byproduct to reduce the joint production costs, or we can simply show it on the income statement either as a separate income item or as a reduction of the cost of goods sold. So in the case of that pharmaceutical company that we're looking at that did soap and face creams and stuff like that, remember, we started out on the Dead Sea harvesting the mud. So what happens when they go and they process this stuff, for each batch of the mud that they actually process and they split it off into the different products, they actually, there's mercury that has to be removed. You know, mercury, years ago, they used to put it in thermometers and can be pretty dangerous stuff. So you got to dispose of that in a very environmentally friendly way. So rather than incurring the cost of disposing of it in an environmentally friendly way, let's assume that every time they have a batch of the Dead Sea mud, they go and they sell it for $320. So how would you account for that $320? Again, you have two choices. It could be as a reduction of the production costs that you would actually allocate, the reduction of the joint cost, or it could be a separate item on the income statement, either without any cost of goods sold or with as a reduction of cost of goods sold. So if you ever come across byproducts, you don't have to worry, and you're asked to make an allocation. Don't worry, you're not going to have to allocate on the basis square footage or machine hours or anything like that with regard to byproducts. It's generally thought to be a very small amount of revenue that comes out of the production process. So it's either a reduction of the joint cost or it's a separate line item on the income statement. All right, so that's all I want to say about byproducts. Let's talk a little bit about cost allocation here. So we know in this particular chapter, what we've done is we have looked at accounting for support costs, and we've also looked at accounting for joint costs. So let's take a look at the application of these two topics in a performance evaluation context. So let's assume we got a couple of different divisions of companies, and there's a manager in charge of each of those divisions, and we want to measure his or her performance. And one of the ways that we might measure their performance is on their ability to control production costs. And generally, managers who can keep production costs down, that's a good thing to do, and we might want to reward them for that. So how do we figure out if they're doing a good job controlling costs? Well, we'll put together a schedule where we'll keep track of the direct materials used for their division or their product line. We'll take a look at the direct labor that they have. We'll compare what was budgeted to what the actual costs were, and then we'll take a look at the support costs that have been allocated to them. And if there's a joint production process, we'll take a look at the joint production costs which have been allocated to them. So to make this more real, let's look at an example. So this is a new example here. We've got 3 general managers, and they have 3 separate chemical lines that they oversee. So we have Olafax, which is managed by Jamal Williams. We've got Dryson, which is managed by Jen Tully, and we've got something called Gestel, which is managed by Tanisha Strongly. So just take a moment to digest this. Let me get my head out of the way here. There we go, I'm skipping around here. So using support department and joint cost allocations for performance evaluation. So you want to evaluate these managers. And so look at that chart for a moment and ask yourself, which manager do you think is doing a better job controlling costs? So the way you read that, you've got for each of them, you've got an actual column, you've got a target column, and then you've got whether they're over or under budget. So if you go to the bottom here, if I can show my little arrow here, hope this shows up on the screen. If you take a look at Jamal Williams, the actual costs were $1,724,000. That was the target, $1,724,000. The actual was 183 roughly. So Jamal is over budget by $148,700. Take a look at Jen. Jen had costs budgeted a target of 605, and she had 728. So she's actually over by 123,600. And then seeing a trend here, take a look at Tanisha. She had a target of 315. She's got 357. So she's over by 42,350. So you might look at those. And if I said to you, who do you think is doing a better job controlling cost? If you just look at where they were in terms of the overall budget here. So for her area, Tanisha is over budget 42,350. Jen is over budget 123.6, and Jamal is over budget 148. So it'd be very simple to say, look, well, the one who's doing a better job here is Tanisha, because everyone else is over budget, but she's only over budget by 42,350. Well, that might be one way to do it. Another way to look at it is take a look at the amount that Jamal is over budget by 148,750. The target there was 1,724,000. So Jamal is actually over budget by about 8.6%. And Jen is over budget of the 123.6. If you divide that by 605, Jen is over budget by over 20%. And then Tanisha actually is over budget. The 42,350 divided by 315 gives you 13.5%. So if you look at where they are in terms of being a percentage of over the budget, actually Jamal actually is the one that has the smallest variance of 8.6%. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way you might want to look at this is you ask yourself, what is it that Jamal and Jen and Tanisha actually control directly? So what they control directly is the materials cost and the labor costs. So if you take a look at just the combination of material and labor costs, you'll see that the parenthesis means under budget. So Jamal here is under for direct materials, over for direct labor by 2,200. So he's over budget by 450. Take a look at Jen. Jen is under budget for materials, under budget for labor. So she's actually, things she can directly control is under budget by $3,800. And then if you look at our friend Tanisha here, who looked under, for she was doing the best job, Tanisha is actually over budget on materials of 36, under budget by 1,650 on labor. So she's actually over budget by 34,350. So if you look at it on the basis of who's actually doing a better job and what they can actually control, actually it turns out to be Jen, because if you look at what she controls, she's actually under budget by $3,800. And now you look at the stuff that's in the middle. Notice this is the allocation of support costs. So support costs would be departments that they didn't manage. And this one was allocated on the basis of square feet and the number of employees. So each of these managers really doesn't have any direct control on the allocation of support costs. And the joint costs, they were allocated on the basis of net realizable value of the chemicals produced. So there might be, there's a impact there in terms of the market value of the goods. So maybe that's a fair allocation. And you can see the one who gets the biggest chunk of these costs is Jen. And you might say to yourself, well, the reason she's got the biggest allocation of the cost is that she's producing the most valuable product. So a couple of things to notice about these reports. One, at this point, understand where the numbers come from. So direct materials, direct labor, we've had those since chapter 1. These are the allocation of the support costs. These are the allocation of the joint costs. So all those things go into, but you have to ask yourself, if you're looking at the going to reward managers for controlling costs, you've got to ask yourself, of the costs that are allocated to them, which one are they really in a better position to actually control and influence? Okay, so that's all I want to say about that. I'm not going to get into the optional topic of reciprocal services method, I think we got enough to chew on with the various methods that we looked at for direct for allocating joint costs. All right. So that concludes lectures on Chapter 5. If you haven't done already done so, go ahead and do the homework for Chapter 5 and then get into Chapter 6. Thank you for your suggestions on how the class can be made more effective. I will consider those, and thank you for your suggestions on the exam as well. We'll factor those in and consider those in planning the next exam. So until next time, my friend Mr. Spock and I, if you haven't Googled Mr. Spock, look up Mr. Spock, very important person. He used to say, live long and prosper. So Mr. Spock and I wish you adios, au revoir, hasta luego, have a good weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Don't forget to finish the homework for 5 and any previous homework, and then go on and read Chapter 6. See you on Tuesday, guys. Take care.